Before we start this podcast, do you know a stroke survivor that's currently socially isolated? Someone that might benefit from spending some time with a professional actor delivering a live reading service to them? If you do, Interact have launched an exciting new project called Interact at Home, where we deliver a live reading service directly into people's homes using technology such as Zoom, but we can also do it via the good old-fashioned telephone too. If this is something of interest to you or someone you know, further details can be found at our website, www.interactstrokesupport.org, or simply Google Interact at Home, Interact Stroke Support. And what's more, during the trial phase, we're offering this service free of charge. So please let people know. That's Interact at Home, and further details are available from our website. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Right Side of the Brain, the arts and health podcast created by Interact Stroke Support. My guest in this podcast is the Chief Executive of the Stroke Association, Juliet Bouverie. This interview was recorded during the period of the lockdown. Juliet Bouverie, welcome to Right Side of the Brain.
Hello, Nirjay. Nice to talk to you.
Can we start with who is Juliet Bouverie? Tell us about your childhood.
I was brought up in North Oxfordshire, between Banbury and Oxford, and I went to school locally, and then ironically I went on to university at the University of Oxford, so most of my education was in Oxfordshire, and I'm number 3 out of my 4 siblings. I've got an older sister, an older brother, then me and a younger sister.
And am I right in thinking, Juliet, that you studied French at university?
Yeah, I studied French and German, so I studied modern languages.
Mm-hmm. And so what were your aspirations then as a younger person?
Well, to be honest, I wasn't somebody who had a really clear career path. And I think I knew more about what I didn't want to do than what I did want to do. So I knew I didn't want to go down a conventional route. So a lot of people who read languages go into the law, or they go into education or teaching or translating. But I knew I wanted to do something that made a social impact and that aligned with my personal values. Both my parents did a lot of volunteering. My mother was very involved with the Girl Guides as a volunteer. And as a teenager and a young person at university, I also volunteered quite a lot for charities and did quite a lot of fundraising. So I knew I wanted to make a social impact and do something that aligned with my personal values, but I didn't really know what. And I certainly never could have dreamt when I was at university that I'd be a charity chief executive. I never would have ever imagined that was possible. So life turns out in surprising ways.
Yes, it certainly does. And I certainly know that feeling as well. So there you are. You've completed your French and German degree. Tell us about your journey after university.
So I started off working for a public affairs consultancy. Mm-hmm. So we represented clients in the European Commission. So I used to travel to Brussels quite a lot and get involved in protecting their interests in the European Parliament and the European Commission, but also lobbying the UK government for change. And I did that for a couple of years. And although the work was interesting because we had a variety of clients, so I had to learn about different sectors very quickly, I soon realised that actually Monday to Friday, you spend more of your waking hours at work than you do at home. And that actually work was more than just a means to an end and more than just a financial kind of reason, but it needed to kind of give me some sense of personal fulfillment and social impact. So I made a positive decision after a couple of years after leaving university to join the charity sector. And my first job was with a very, very small charity in London called the Community Development Foundation, which basically was all focused on local communities and how you engage and develop local social and voluntary action. And then I moved from there to the British Red Cross, and I was there for 8 years. I had a wonderful time at the British Red Cross, mostly working on the UK side, occasionally internationally, but where I moved more into strategy and policy. If I'm honest with you, I rather enjoyed influencing how the money was spent than actually raising the money myself. And then I moved from the British Red Cross to Macmillan Cancer Support, and I was there for 16 years in a variety of roles, including about 8 years on the executive team. And then I joined the Stroke Association nearly 4 years ago as the chief executive.
Yes. And am I right in saying, and I presume, Juliet, that this was when you were with Macmillan Cancer, that your partner became very ill and you had to look after him. Is that correct? And could you describe the circumstances of this?
Yeah, so, I mean, it was really tough, Nirjay. We met at university. So we met when we were both 21, and we assumed we had our whole life ahead of us and that we were going to have a family and children. And it never crossed our minds that one of us would get seriously ill. And John, who was my late husband, was diagnosed with a brain tumour when he was 34. And it was a very advanced brain tumour. He'd had no symptoms that indicated that he was ill, so he wasn't experiencing headaches or dizziness or any confusion. But I came home from work one evening to find him looking very confused, and he'd cut his forehead and he'd clearly fallen. And I just knew something was wrong. And then within about 5 minutes of me coming home, he had a major seizure, a major epileptic fit. And obviously I called 999, and the first thing they do if somebody has an unexplained seizure, as you probably know, is order a brain scan. And then he was diagnosed with a really large tumour in the left frontal lobe. And it was so large that it was inoperable. And that was, devastating, as you can imagine, because we knew there was only one outcome, which he was going to die of this tumour, but we had no idea how quickly it was going to advance or how long we had together. So that was very tricky. And we had to go through a period of what the NHS call watchful waiting, where they prefer not to give treatment because radiotherapy reduces the plasticity in the brain. So they wanted to keep his brain as plastic as possible to move around the obstruction. But then, he had to have about 2 years of radiotherapy. And then he died very suddenly when he was only 39. It was tough.
Juliet, may I ask you, so was there a period then when that was occurring where you effectively were your husband's carer?
I was his carer, and I remember being phoned by social services when I was driving in the car with John in the passenger seat next to me, and they asked me if I wanted a carer's assessment. And I think even though I knew about carers assessments because they were things that we would promote to carers to people with cancer, it was funny how much of a shock it came to me, and how I think it was the first time when I realised that, I was his carer. But, when you love somebody, you just want to make their pain better. You want to do everything possible that you can to protect them and to ease kind of their plight. So you do it and it doesn't feel like a burden. But yes, I was a carer, and that was tough because I was a working carer. And it was also tough because I didn't have any friends who were in the same position. And when John died and I was bereaved, I found it very difficult because all of my other friends, were happily in relationships, and a lot of them were bringing up young children. They were very busy, and of course it was hard for them to identify with what I was going through. I felt very alone, and there were times when I was caring for John when I felt very alone as well.
Do you think that experience, Juliet, of being a carer yourself has given you a different perspective of what it is like to be a carer? For example, you have a lot of experience working in the cancer, Macmillan cancer, and you also work, obviously with stroke. So the fact that you've been a carer, do you think that gives you a greater understanding of what it is that carers go through?
I hope so, Nirjay. I mean, clearly everybody's experience as a carer is slightly different. And I would never say to somebody, I understand what you're going through, because I don't think you can ever put yourself in somebody else's shoes. But I hope I have some insights that I'm able to bring to my role. I hope I have I have a genuine compassion for people who are carers, particularly carers of people with neurological conditions. Because although my John had a brain tumour, actually the side effects of his brain tumour were remarkably similar to stroke survivors or other people who've had a brain attack. He struggled with his balance and his mobility, and when he was tired, with his speech and communication, and towards the end he struggles with writing and reading, and it's very tough when some of the effects are invisible, and it's tough when you are spending so much time at home and you want to be brave and strong, because I knew that the thing that was making John most anxious was the impact of his illness on me, and he was most worried about how I was going to cope when he died. So you try to pretend that you're okay, and you when you're not really. So it's tough, and I think certainly at the Stroke Association, I know that stroke turns the world of kind of the family upside down just as much as the world of the stroke survivor. And sometimes, to be honest, it's almost worse for the carers, because they're carrying all the burden, they're having to make all the decisions. There are times when stroke survivors spend quite a bit of their day sleeping, or they're slightly confused about what's happening, whereas for the carer, they're acutely aware of both what's happening in the present, but also what's going to happen in the future.
Yes.
And they carry that burden.
Yes. I noticed in that answer that you used the phrase brain attack. I've always believed, I don't know whether you'll agree or disagree with me, but I have always believed stroke should be called a brain attack. I just wanted to know what your view on that was.
So it's funny you should say that, Nirjay, because it's become one of the key messages for the Stroke Association, that when we describe a stroke, we refer to it as a brain attack, because I'm always amazed that stroke is so horribly prevalent. Everyone seems to know someone who's had a stroke, and yet public understanding and awareness about stroke is shockingly low. But when you explain to people that it's a brain attack, and then people start to understand that it affects, the brain is the control center for who we are and what we do, isn't it? And then people start to understand the kind of breadth and depth of disability that stroke causes. But people can also understand that recovery is possible, because neural pathways can rebuild. But you can't start a conversation about stroke without going back to what it is. And you have to keep reinforcing that it's a very, very serious injury in the brain.
Yes. So you've been in post now for, I think, about 4 years.
That's right.
Juliet, what have you learnt about stroke that you didn't know before?
I think the first thing is the kind of resilience and courage that stroke survivors show. I continue to be impressed by how brave our stroke survivors are, and how positive they are despite the kind of multiple challenges that they have to deal with in everyday life, and how they kind of overcome those challenges with, frankly, courage and positivity. And, having a stroke is really tough. And for many, they struggle to adjust psychologically, and people can kind of fall into anxiety and depression. And yet there are so many stroke survivors who overcome that and who are able to adjust to a new norm and to look forward. So I think that's the first thing. I think the other thing is that at the beginning, when I joined the Stroke Association, I was told by quite a lot of stroke consultants that there's a kind of window of recovery. And you're smiling because you've heard this as well, about 6 months. You've got 6 months from the time of your stroke to the time when recovery is possible, and then after 6 months you plateau. And it's just not true, Nirjay. I mean,
Absolutely
I've
right.
met so many hundreds of stroke survivors who've disproved that theory.
Exactly.
And it's funny, I am volunteering for a new service that the Stroke Association has developed during the coronavirus pandemic. And it's a service where volunteers are connecting with stroke survivors to just chat with them and reduce some of the social isolation. And one of the stroke survivors that I'm paired with is this absolutely delightful woman. And she had a really severe stroke 2.5 years ago. And she went for 2 years without being able to speak at all. And suddenly, in the last 6 months, she's speaking. And her word recall is improving every week I speak to her. And it's just extraordinary that the brain suddenly has managed to kind of put 2 and 2 together, make 4, and she's speaking.
Of course, I totally agree with you in what you've just said there, and like you have seen it myself. Juliet, there may be some people who will listen to this podcast and they may have heard of the Stroke Association because you're probably almost certainly the most high profile stroke charity out there, but they may not know what the Stroke Association actually does. So could you tell us, what does the Stroke Association do?
Yeah. So our mission is to help people to rebuild their lives after stroke. And we do that through delivering stroke support. So we have a range of different services that provide information and support to help people to rebuild their lives after stroke. We also fund pioneering research, and we campaign for change as well. So we make sure that policymakers prioritise stroke, and that stroke is given the priority that it needs and deserves across all 4 countries of the UK.
So, Julia, just talk me through the pathway then. Let's say that somebody has had a stroke. They're in a rehab unit at a hospital. They're then discharged, and they will, as a broad generalisation, have their 6 to 8 week occupational and speech therapy interventions that occur. Where does the Stroke Association come in within that pathway?
Okay, so interestingly, during this COVID crisis, we have launched a new service so that in geographies where we don't currently have a service that's commissioned by the NHS, we are following people up as soon as they're discharged from hospital with a phone call. So every newly discharged stroke survivor is getting a phone call from us to find out how they are, and then we can send them the information and support that they need to start to rebuild their lives after stroke. We also have some UK services. So we have a national stroke helpline that's open Monday to Fridays and Saturday mornings. We have our website, and we have an online portal called My Stroke Guide, where you can go to find videos and information about stroke, and you can also chat to other stroke survivors online. And then we have our local services. And our local services are commissioned by either the NHS or local authorities. But unfortunately, not all parts of the NHS and not all local authorities prioritise stroke. So we have some stroke recovery services and some communication support services in some parts of the UK, but not everywhere. So that's why our UK services are so important, that we can actually be there for everyone.
Yeah. So what would you say then, Juliet, COVID-19 aside, obviously, what are the biggest challenges that the Stroke Association faces?
I think the biggest challenge, to be honest, Nirjay, is engaging the public with stroke as a cause. You think about the public support for causes like cancer and dementia and heart disease, and quite rightly, the public is concerned about those high-risk conditions. But there's very little public concern about stroke. And a lot of the research that we have done shows that people don't know that stroke is a brain attack, and it doesn't occupy the same concern or public support that other causes do. So I think the most important thing for us is to engage people with stroke as a cause and a condition that is prevalent, that matters, and that people can recover from. And then when people have got that message, Nirjay, it's then easier for them to understand that there is a charity called the Stroke Association, and we're here to provide support and to help people to rebuild their lives. But it's difficult for us to promote the Stroke Association without that wider understanding and engagement with stroke as a condition that matters.
Do you think that part of that stems from a stereotype that stroke only affects the elderly?
Most definitely, Nirjay. I mean, all of our research shows that most people think that stroke isn't going to happen to them. And if it does happen, it's going to happen to an older person. And there's a kind of fatalism around it. If you're going to die of something, you might as well die of a stroke. Well, as we know, a quarter of strokes happen in people under the age of 65. And actually, the age group where you're seeing the fastest increase in stroke is in people aged 35 to 45. And the other thing about stroke is that it's sudden. It happens in an instant. You have absolutely no time to prepare. And if you have a severe stroke, it can, within hours cause very, very severe, both physical and mental disability and challenges. And so part of what we've been trying to do over the last year through our Rebuilding Lives campaign is change perceptions about stroke and help people to understand that actually it strikes every 5 minutes. It's a brain attack. It can happen to anyone at any time, at any place. It doesn't discriminate. But there's also a positive message that, yes, you may, at the beginning, have to cope with a lot of disability and a lot of challenges, but actually with the right support, you can rebuild your life after stroke. And there is that prospect of recovery and quality of life.
Is the personality of a charity reflected via the personality of its chief executive?
Goodness. One of the reasons why I have absolutely loved this job as chief executive of the Stroke Association from day one, and I really mean that, I have never been in a job where I have been happier, is because there's such an alignment between my personal values and what I believe is important and the organisation's values. Now, I think it is fair to say that the chief executive casts quite a wide shadow, and that actually, if you're going to be an effective leader, you need to be trusted, because leadership is about inspiring followship. And all of us only want to follow somebody that we believe is authentic and really believes in what they're saying. And I suppose I'm naturally quite a passionate person. I'm committed, genuinely committed to the cause. And I hope I'm honest. I try to listen. I try to do my best. If I've made a mistake, I will say so. And I try to lead from my heart as well as my head. And I suppose it is fair to say that good leaders inspire similar behaviours. I don't want my staff to be clones of me. That would be a disaster. But equally, I hope that I can set a tone.
Yes.
And I hope that tone is reflected in both our actions, but also our behaviours. But I have to say I'm blessed, our staff and our volunteers. I mean, we've got the most amazing volunteers at the Stroke Association. They're the ones who inspire me, and they're the ones who teach me a lot every day. So I'm very lucky.
Juliet, you will obviously know that Interact Stroke Support take professional actors into hospitals and read to stroke patients, and we do that to alleviate the depression that you will know so often exists with stroke survivors, and to stimulate memory, stimulate language. So I just wanted to know then, what is your view of the arts in relation to health and rehabilitation?
Yes, I think hugely important, Nirjay. I mean, there's a growing body of evidence, isn't there, about the difference that arts make to people's health, both their mental health and their physical health. And we absolutely see that with our stroke survivors, particularly those who benefit from the network of stroke clubs and groups that exist across the UK. And they get up to all sorts of creative things, arts, crafts, singing, making all sorts of fantastic things, particularly for Christmas, knitting, crochet, you name it, they're up to it. And, we hear time and time again that not only does it make a difference to people's mental health, it clearly improves your sort of self-esteem and your mood, but also some of these things can improve stroke survivors' dexterity.
Yes.
And often one of the side effects of a stroke can be spasticity and challenges with the dexterity of your hand or your arms or your kind of shoulders. And so some of these things, can really help loosen some of those joints and improve the spasticity as well. I can't say that word.
That's really fascinating that you say that, because obviously under these COVID conditions, Interact we're looking to deliver our service into people's homes via technology such as Zoom, Skype, WhatsApp, and the good old-fashioned telephone too. So if the Stroke Association could let stroke survivors know about that, I'm sure that there are many people out there who'd love to be on the receiving end of a professional actor reading them a variety of stories.
So Nirjay, people would love that. So maybe separately you could kind of send me an email that I can then share more widely across the organisation, because our stroke coordinators are now supporting their clients remotely through phone, through Zoom, through WhatsApp, and so too are our stroke clubs and groups. And I think that would be really nice to promote your service, because you're absolutely right, for those people who are socially isolated and for those people who are struggling without friends and family close by and don't have that much social interaction or stimulation, your kind of service can make a massive difference. I'd be really happy to promote that.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Juliet, I wanted to ask you something else. It's sort of become a bit of a common theme in the various people who I've been interviewing, and it's about diversity of opinion within the charity sector. Do you think that there is a diversity of opinion that occurs within the charity sector, or do you think that there's a predominant of groupthink, where people have the sort of same political views, for example, and they view the world in exactly the same way, and so there's a large swathe of the population that they don't necessarily speak for?
So I think that's a really good challenge, and I think the focus on Black Lives Matter and kind of diversity and inclusion is a really good challenge, because I think every individual and every organisation needs to hold the mirror up to themselves at the moment and say, what can we do differently and what can we do better? Because we know that difference of opinion and difference of perspective and difference in terms of social background, age, ethnicity, gender, if you can corral those differences, you're going to get better outcomes. You're going to make better decisions, aren't you? And I think we have to be really careful that we don't recruit in our own image, and that we don't kind of fall into groupthink, which may be easier, but is not necessarily going to result in the right outcomes. And I worry a lot about I mean, we know that stroke's more prevalent in Black and minority ethnic communities and in socioeconomically deprived communities. And I think the Stroke Association, and I think other charities, have a lot more to do, to be honest, Nirjay, to really reach out to those who are most vulnerable, those who are most marginalised, and often they're not users of the NHS. They're not even within the mainstream health and social care services. And I think we've got to work really differently with local community groups, with faith leaders, with others who have the trust and respect of those communities, and through them be able to offer our support. Because I think a lot of charities are seen as white, middle class, bourgeois, and I think we need to do a lot more to be relevant to different communities. And I think internally we need to look, talk, work in ways that are genuinely inclusive. And I'm not sure that we do that all the time, Nirjay.
Yeah. And finally, Juliet, what's the most common feedback that you get from stroke survivors?
I think the most common one is, if only we'd known about you earlier. Because we don't have local services in every geography, and because we don't have a huge marketing budget, we're not a charity that's well known. So sometimes people find out about our services by luck.
Yes.
And the people who benefit from our services absolutely love them, but they very often said, if only I'd known earlier that you'd have offered this, it so would have helped myself or my loved one or my neighbour.
Yeah. Well, if the Stroke Association is not a charity that's very well known, God help the rest of us that work in the stroke domain.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I know that we're seen by, our partners in the stroke community as being big and kind of well known. But I can assure you, all of our public research shows that there's very little awareness of the Stroke Association as a UK charity.
Yeah, I lied when I said final question. What would you like to be doing in the future, Juliet?
Carrying on trying to make a difference. That's all I want to do in terms of my working career. I'm absolutely loving being at the Stroke Association. I've got absolutely no intention of looking elsewhere. I feel like we've only just started, we've only just started on our new strategy. And COVID-19, as it is for every business and every charity, is presenting us with serious financial challenges. So I want to make sure that the charity is doing the right thing for stroke survivors, but also financially sustainable. I think I've got another job in me at some point. It will definitely still be in the voluntary and community sector. But I have no ambitions to move right now.
Juliet, your passion shines through, as always. Juliet Bouverie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nirjay.
That was Juliet Bouverie. For more information about our work, please do visit our website at www.interactstrokesupport.org. And if you're feeling generous, please do click on the big red donate button. I very much look forward to your company on the next edition of Right Side of the Brain.